Yeah, just interested to know the difference between like your soft head, your hard heads, black ones you got, and yeah, just your different heads that you run and what they actually do compared to the others.
Okay, yeah, all right. I'll go into that in a little bit, but basically, there's no difference at all. Not one bit, not 1%, not 0.1% difference to any fish whatsoever, whether you're using soft heads or hard heads. Um, the reason I use soft heads is they don't ding the boat, and if you get hit in the head, and they don't hurt as much as a hard head, and hard heads tend to chip, and that's about the only reasoning behind it. From a production point of view, the soft heads, you can get a lot more out of a mould than you can out of the hard heads. The hard heads tend to chew up the moulds. So from a production point of view, we prefer to do the soft heads. Absolutely no difference to the fish. In the ranges we do, I'll probably cover that now because I don't really talk that much about it during the actual talks. We do a bunch of ranges of lures, and I'll try to explain the difference between them. I'll actually go to another camera. Okay, so we've got three ranges of lures. This is the original heads. It's got a Lumo eye, just folded foil. This is a traditional one that I've been doing pretty much since 1983. I keep trying to kill the range, but I haven't been able to because it has been highly successful. So we still make them. We've made them in soft heads for the last 6 or 7 years, and now we're just converting them back to hard heads for a while, for no reason apart from the production. And basically, some people love the hard heads, some people like the soft heads. This is what I would consider the basic range. It's very old, it certainly still works, but these are the more advanced one. This is a power head without the jet holes. This way is a bit more, it's a bit more stable in the water than the original range, and also we upscaled the sizes about 10% in each of the lures. For example, a power sprocket is about 10% bigger than a sprocket, and that just means it's a bit more stable in the water and a bit easier to use for most boats. And the top of the range is the jet heads, which is also a power jet head. Apart from having the jets in it, which apart from popular belief giving it a bigger smoke trail, it doesn't. But what it does do, it actually gives the lure more stability and less tendency to spin in the water, which is pretty important. And they're also keel weighted, which means they've got a lot of weight in the lower section of the lure to try and keep the lure upright and give it a bit of stability. You'll hear the terminology, that people think a weighted lure is good because it makes the lure more stable and all that sort of stuff. Get a heavy lure for rough conditions. Well, we make a lure called the 3D shredders. These are our 3D shredder range. They're incredibly light. In fact, they weigh next to nothing. This lure weighs about, I think that's about 70 grams. This weighs about 15 grams a head, and it's more stable than any of the others because we've put Venturi jets in it and designed it for all conditions, which we could only do on a 3D printer. And that's probably the best rough water lure we actually make, even though it weighs absolutely nothing. Design beats weight every time, especially in water, because the water's so dense that to make things heavy in water is incredibly difficult. Divide an ounce by 800 times, and that's what they weigh in water compared to what they weigh in air. Does that make sense? So the way it basically works is the original range is certainly still, it's got thousands of fish, won lots and lots and lots of tournaments. Still a favourite to the old timers. I certainly prefer the power heads, and going up in price, the power heads are 10% more expensive than the originals. Considering that they're 10% bigger, they're actually at the same price. The jet heads are quite expensive because they're hard to produce, probably in price 20% more than the power heads, and certainly all the lures I use are the jet heads because they are they're a premium range, and I get them cheap anyway, so I can run the premium range. Okay, where the shredders come into their own, they're the same price as the original range, and they're incredibly good for boats without outriggers. And I imagine a lot of your boats wouldn't have outriggers because you're not, as you said earlier, you're not a game fishing club, so a lot of your boats wouldn't have outriggers. So even though these don't look fancy, It's a bit like Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's the Holy Grail. It doesn't need all the fancy trimming, because all the fancy trimming that you pay for, like all the power shell and stuff, the fish can't see it anyway because the lure's covered in bubbles. So this is a very plain lure and just does the job, and is exceptionally good for boats without outriggers, which I'll get to later and explain why. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.